Welcome to another war story. This one deals with the final battle in the Creek War of 1814. The war started in 1813. We covered that in the last episode. I'll drop a link to that below for you guys. But today's battle is Horseshoe Bend. This is what lined up the end of it. From the map on the screen you can see here, all of this territory down here was set up with Jackson's army. So picture this. It's a very cold end of winter day. It's March 26, 1814. 3,300 men have just taken a 52-mile trip from Fort Strother to here. They cut a road in 3 days.
The woods in the wintertime.
And in addition, not only were they just bringing themselves and their muskets or their guns, but they were bringing cannons and munitions and all of this and setting up at this spot right here in preparation of the battle. Now, as night came, Andrew Jackson was talking with his officers, and as the next day came around, Andrew Jackson and his guys, they were moving forward down to this spot on the map right here. John Coffey and 1,300 other guys went around the other way to the spot over here on the map. The idea was John Coffey would create a diversion for Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Jackson would ultimately create a diversion for John Coffey. So the two diversions helped each other. Otherwise, they would not have been able to take this fortress that the Creek had. So Jackson took his guys and they went around here. John Coffey split off, and his men
Went around the loop.
went
on
around
the
the
backside.
loop.
I'm going to do it right here.
Yes.
Okay.
Boy, it is definitely something thinking about those guys walking and through all that. And I'm sure this was a lot more heavily wooded.
Yeah. Okay. We're right here at the island. They call this Beans Island. It's just it's a 15-acre island right here. And what happened right here is General Coffey ordered Lieutenant Bean and 40 of his men to go to this island right here. And if you can see, there's a flat spot right there where they set up camp right there along the edge of the island. And any Creek warriors that were trying to escape here, Horseshoe Bend, and get across the river right here to that island, he kept them from getting over to the island and fleeing the war site. So any boats from the creeks that tried to get across the river, Lieutenant Bean sunk before they even got to the island. So there was no way for them to escape. That was their only escape. And he already had 40 men over there on the island, and he prevented Creeks from jumping over the river into the island and taking refuge.
Part of Bean's orders that I thought were really amazing that Jackson put out there was if he saw any of the militiamen trying to escape, get out, run, they were to be shot too.
Oh, because they were going AWOL.
This was the point of no return. When the soldiers made it to this point, it was like no return. This was the best strategic place to knock anybody trying to get out.
Right, and then he set up camp right over there, guys. And he kept soldiers from going AWOL and Creek Native Americans from escaping across the river to get away from Coffey and Andrew Jackson. So there was no escape. They had to fight or die. And that's what happened here. This is site number 1 at the Battle of the Island right here. So you can see the barricade will be all the way across the peninsula. Okay. And he said it was like 8 feet tall, and with logs and double structures and portholes where they could shoot their arrows out of.
We're March 27, early a.m. Before light. Jackson has dropped a regiment off at the island, and he brought 3,300 men with him. He dropped a few off there. And here he stayed with 2,000 men, and he shipped another 1,300 off. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But as they were coming through the terrain, from the point on top of the hill very far, you see the cannon.
Yeah.
And that's the point where they estimate that they set up the barrage. So Jackson and his men are all there. And over here in this field, where we see that fence row marker, that's where the Red Stick encampment was. And they had a very powerful wall up. And for that time, I know it just looks like a bunch of logs and something we could bust through. In that day and age, warfare was not as advanced. So that was a really good structure. Jackson even made a comment to how strong it was. So starting at 8:30 in the morning, Jackson starts firing 2 cannons constantly, repetitively at this wall. One. For 2 hours, Jackson's shooting these. And he's noticing this wall's not budging. This wall's not going anywhere. It's staying right in place. And he's like, well, okay, we have a secret weapon. They don't know what's happening because we have them so distracted. We're making so much racket on this side. And what we didn't notice was 1,300 men, along with John Coffey, slipped around back. And they went all the way around to the other side. So with the Red Stick encampment, just right in this area, General Coffey left Jackson's accompaniment, taking 1,300 men. They circled around up into this area over here.
Across the river.
Yeah, right across the river on the other side of this river. Now, what was amazing is the time of year. You got to remember, guys, it's March, and in Alabama, it's not warm all the time, so it's very cold. The leaves are down. I mean, you can probably hear the cracking in the leaves as I'm walking. These men, 1,300 men, had to essentially sneak around. That's what the incredible part of this is. The 1,300 men, they snuck to the backside, but now you got to remember, from this side here, there's a barrage of gunfire coming and coming and coming.
It's smoke and cannons and everything going. And they know that the war's going on. They know that Jackson's advancing.
Right. They know he's there. He's moving.
Now,
but they think their fort's impenetrable. They think Jackson's just going to blow out all his artillery. Then they're going to climb the walls and go over. And they're going to take him out.
Right.
That didn't happen.
Or they were going to escape across the river.
So John Coffey and his accompaniment were up on top of this ridge here. And on this side was all of the boats, some weaponry, and supplies.
So what Andrew Jackson and General Coffey decided to do was take a Native American colored whale, and he got some of the Cherokee in the creek that were loyal to them, and they swam. And then this is March, guys, and it's cold down here. That river is cold. They swam over here and stole the Red Stick's canoes, so they had no way of escaping off of this peninsula. So when they fled down these banks and tried to get to the river to their canoes, what did they find? Nothing. They didn't find anything. Their canoes were gone. And the ones who did try to swim it, they said that Coffey and the other Native Americans that were loyal to them were taking them out before they even hit the bank on the other side. That none were escaping from this area right here.
Right. Exactly. So, all the boats are gone now.
Yeah.
There's no escape, no way out. The Red Sticks, their families, everything, they're trapped in this area.
If you look down through here, I mean, look at it.
And you know, at that time, I mean, I'm looking at some of these trees, and it's a possibility that a few of these trees were here.
Right.
But not many. Not many of these trees. So now, as all of this is going on down here, Andrew Jackson saw that puff of smoke up there. Because John Coffey's team is making advancement across the river and into the backside of the encampment.
And so now what's going on? Now we got a squeeze effect. They're surrounding them and squeezing them in. And they said from this site right here, you could see where some of his men were already setting their village on fire.
Right, so there was smoke, gunfire. So now Jackson, he's up here, he's firing his barrage, and he's getting a little discouraged now. I mean, 2 hours and nothing's happening. Next thing you know, way off in the distance, puff of smoke, followed by another puff of smoke. So now Jackson knows John Coffey's made his mission.
Right, he's on the other
He's
end.
coming on the backside. And on that backside, he's created another diversion. And during the diversion on the backside, now Jackson and his forces are running this way. This young man right here,
Major Lemuel Montgomery, he acted with the greatest gallantry. March 27th, leading the charge on the Indian defenses. Major Montgomery fell while storming log barricades. Horseshoe Bend was his first battle. But the 28-year-old Tennessean, already a distinguished lawyer, was among the most promising of Jackson's officers.
Major Lemuel Montgomery was one of the first people killed in battle. A young man, 28 years old, professional of the day, and he was one of the stronger men. But following this gentleman here was a man named Sam Houston. And we all know Sam Houston from Houston,
Right.
Texas and all that. A lot of people don't realize Sam Houston actually got his start, where his name was made, was at this battle right here in 1814.
Nice.
So Sam Houston goes, he's the first one over the wall. He gets shot in the arm with an arrow. It gives him trouble the rest of his life, but he's the first one over. Now the battle actually begins. Chief Menawa is in there with 1,000 Red Stick warriors and their families. What we have to remember is during these wars, encampments were not just military encampments to the native peoples of these lands. That was where your family was.
Right.
And we did the same thing when we settled. We came over and we put our families in and we inside of a fort.
Right, everybody was together.
So when it was attacked, you're going, I mean, the families, all of that. And unfortunately, that is the casualty of war. Collateral damage is, you cannot avoid it. But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the battle's raging. There's 1,000 men versus 3,300. As the day rolls on, they climb the fence. Jackson and his team, in about 5 hours after climbing the fence, getting over, breaking down those walls, they managed to annihilate most all of the Red Sticks in there.
Right here on this field back here behind us, you can see this is where the village was set up. The women and children were all encamped here in temporary homes they had set up through the winter when their men were building that fortification of logs, that wall to stop Jackson from coming down. So the women and children were set up here, just like we used to do in the old times. Our women and children would be in the forts with us. So they had their women and children with them. And they had them fortified right here in this area. And I can imagine being a mom, sitting there with my kids and hearing the cannons go off, the gunfire go off, and the people yelling and screaming and knowing it's coming towards you. And when the Cherokee came in and burnt their village, they took 350 women and children out and held them as prisoners. And it all happened right here. And the rest of them were killed, and they burnt the village to the ground.
And something, you know, a lot of folks don't know or even think about was there were friendly natives, and we call them friendly natives simply because they drank the Kool-Aid. They drank the Kool-Aid that the new US was offering.
Yeah.
They liked the progressive ways. They liked the technologies of the time, the government. They liked the way things were set up, and the Lower Creek
Right.
were more into the progression of this. This group that was here, anti-change of any kind. They wanted to keep with traditions. And I have to say, I do respect that a lot.
I'm a traditionalist. I don't like tradition changing. And they didn't want to be a part of that. And this was their last stronghold, their last village, their last holdout, their last ditch effort to hold on to their culture and their tradition. And I understand that. I understand grasping and holding on to that. Then I understand the horror of knowing that you're fixing to be prisoner. you're going to be assaulted. You might be killed. You're going to be a slave, and you're going to be that to the Cherokee.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's just the fear and the torture going through their heads, and their husbands are killed.
Right. And the Cherokee were such a massive ally
Yeah.
to the United States troops and forces at that time. It was nothing for them to come in and handle this, because even so, you got to realize our country at this time was 28 years old.
It was still a baby.
Independence was gotten nearly 3 decades ago, and we were still fighting for it. We still had the British up on the Canadian border, we had the British out west, and we had the Spanish to the south in Florida. So there was a lot of fighting, but there was a different style of fighting that the native people of this land had. It was more of a guerrilla warfare.
Right, they had those sticks and they painted them red, which I'll show right here in the picture. They had these red sticks and they painted them red, these weapons that they used. They were primitive weapons.
Right, but it's kind of, this war kind of changed how we as Americans learned to do warfare.
Yes.
Because before that time, in colonial times especially, and this was still essentially colonial times, I mean 1814,
That is still colonial.
yeah, we're not even 50 years out of colonial times.
Right.
So 1814, it was still the type of mentality where you had a guy with a flag, you had guys with drums and horns, and you're announcing the whole time you're coming.
Right, so they hear you. They hear the drums coming
Right.
closer and closer and closer.
But the native peoples understood guerrilla warfare,
Right.
which we know today that's like hiding in the trees and coming out on surprise and doing surprise attacks. And really and truly, Jackson's attempt to come in the morning, which paid off tremendously,
Yes.
but his attempt to come in the morning was really kind of our country's first major guerrilla strike, because everything was done in so much secrecy.
Right, and then the way he had coffee around and how he had those loyal Native Americans swim in that cold river in March to get these canoes, the loyalty to that side of it.
Right.
And what they were doing. And those Native Americans, I think, are the ones who taught them, okay, if you're going to do this, let's do this correctly. And let's do this the way we would do it. And we can teach you how to go in there and get them. And that's exactly what they did. The Cherokee helped them take out the Red Sticks. It was brutal in its day. This was a brutal battle, a brutal takeover.
Right. The Europeans coming into this country, it forced the native people to make alliances they would not have
Yes.
made with each other, and many of them made alliances with us. And it wasn't because, at least let me just put it like this, I don't believe the alliances they made to the U.S. people was because they were loyal and they really loved it. I think it was a fear of the weaponry. And we go through a lot of that today.
But it's Darwinism at its best, isn't it? It's survival.
It really is.
So it doesn't matter how strong you are. If that's what it takes to survive, then that's how you're going to align yourself. And what is happening today in the world, it's the same thing. It's going to be the weak are going to align with the ones that they think they're going to help them survive. These countries are going to, what are these countries doing right now? They're trying to align with NATO and other countries that are going to help them survive. It's all about survival. And that's what they were doing here. And these women and children had their village burnt down, their husbands killed, and they were taken captive. And that's what happened here at this site.
Right, and I can't fault anyone for trying to survive.
No. Stuck them in this holler.
Well, you know, best.
Surround them on all sides.
That's what I say. Keep them in the bowl. You take the high ground.
And they have access to water. Right?
Yes. The battle's coming to a close. Andrew Jackson's troops lost about 54 men. About 190, I think, or so that were wounded, that reported. And now we find out that over 80% of the Red Sticks were slaughtered at this massacre here, at this battle. 20% of them were still alive. They walked past Chief Menawa's body multiple times, making sure he was dead. Walked around all the men, making sure that there were no survivors. The 20% A few of them got away. The Cherokee imprisoned a lot of them and took them. I'm sure they were slaves or however that handled in that time. But what no one really knew is there was one boat still left. And at nightfall, Chief Menowa, who was not dead, did a great act of playing dead for hours. Crawled to the boat, got down the river, and got away. But that battle marked the end of the Creek War, both internally and with the U.S. At Fort Jackson, in August of that year later, so we're in March right now, this is March 27th still, August of that same year, they signed a treaty at Fort Jackson, essentially giving the Mississippi Territory, all of the Mississippi Territory was now given to the United States, later to become the state of Alabama.
And this little holler right here you see behind him, that little flat spot, is where that 20% lived in 1831, is what they gave that back to the Red Sticks, who did not want to be a part of the government still. And then in 1836, they come through again and drove them out for good.
Right, 1836 was the start of the Trail of Tears. It is a sad time in our history, but it was also the progress of a nation. And we can look at the atrocities we've done in the past and we can dwell on those, or we can look into a brighter future and hope that we can all work together as one great nation.